you're starting to see hotspots, at the $100 price point. I think the one thing that hasn't changed, and here, this is my personal opinion, the community hasn't come up with this proposal yet, but I don't think onboarding a hotspot on the network should cost $50. I think it should be like 10.
This is the 100X podcast. We are joined by the legendary, you probably have already heard of them, Helium, and we've got Abai with us. I'm really stoked for this. We've been diving further and further into DePIN over the last couple of months, and we've been dipping our toes into Solana. And so to be able to bring you guys on, I think is a good pleasure. I'm excited to get into it. Welcome, man. Thank you for joining us. And I would love to kick things off with a simple, somehow, if you've never heard of Helium, what is Helium and what is it that you guys are building? Before we dig into everything this episode has to offer, we want to highlight the awesome partners who sponsor this podcast and make it possible for us to work full-time on 100X. They're legends, and we appreciate them for supporting us. Crypto does not need to be complicated. Kadena is building the human layer of blockchain by giving the power back to the people and allowing them to build products that make a difference for humanity. Founded by ex-JP Morgan and SEC blockchain leads, Kadena develops easy-to-understand, human-readable tools and solutions that focus on the long-term development of the space, not just short-term gains. Simply put, if we want real, regular people to enter and enjoy Web3, Kadena is making a way. To learn more, check out kadena.io, follow them on Twitter at kadena_io, or watch our episode with them. RWA is one of the hottest narratives in 2024, and BlockSquare is actively proving why as the tokenization infrastructure provider for real estate. Tokenization changes everything, taking us from a world where a property is transacted once a decade to one where hundreds of transactions of that same asset are executed in moments. Any business can use BlockSquare to digitize the value of properties, launch investment platforms, and connect people to tokenized real estate deals. They've got every tool you need, whether you're a business or you want to participate in RWA through Ocean Point, where they've brought almost 100 properties on chain. To learn more, join their Telegram community and listen to our episode with them in the description below. Astrobit is the king of automated trading, and now they've introduced a freemium model. Put those trading fees to use. How does it work? Sign up to an exchange with one of Astrobit's affiliate links and receive at least 30 free credits as a loyalty bonus. Then earn credits on your trading fees. The more you trade, the more credits you can generate. Use those credits towards trading bots and strategies. In other words, you can create a passive income stream at no cost. Find more deets in the description below. Your data is one of the most important things about you, yet you don't control it. Giant corporations do, but you can change that with Storage Chain. Imagine Dropbox, iCloud, or whatever else you use, but it's completely decentralized, encrypted, and built on chain. That means you own everything, and it's not stored on some giant server prone to hacks. Safer, cheaper, better. Even cooler, anyone can contribute storage to the network and earn passive income through their blockchain. As tech advances, the cloud too must evolve. Be a pioneer in the new era of decentralized storage. Visit storagechain.io and receive 150 gigs of free storage to start participating in the Web3 revolution today. Imagine if Xbox existed without Xbox Live. No way for gamers to play games, no path for developers to find players. That is Web3 gaming right now. Disjointed, messy, fragmented. Shrapnel has the solution. Built on an AVAX subnet by Mark McCurry, head of blockchain and senior vice president at Consensus, with more than 20 years at Microsoft. This infrastructure, codenamed Bridge, is an all-in-one modular multi-chain solution to make Web3 accessible for Web2 devs. What the heck does that mean? It means real games can actually exist in Web3. No more dreaming. Real blockchain gaming is possible because of Shrapnel's codename Bridge. Find out more about Shrapnel and Bridge in the description below.
Well, first of all, really appreciate being invited to come chat with you guys and chat with your community. Really appreciate that, and yeah, excited about this conversation in general. Yeah, so Helium. Helium is a new way to build wireless networks. That's just at the base layer. That's what we are. we started off as our own blockchain, and we can get into that in a little bit. We currently run on Solana, and we have two kinds of networks: an IoT network and a cellular network. And the protocol as a whole sort of supports any number of networks to be built, and we can get into that as well. But if there's one sort of thing that your listeners should be thinking about, is that Helium is a way to build wireless networks. It's a new kind of business model for building these kinds of networks, and it's a way to allow you to be able to provide coverage for your neighbors and for yourself.
And when we talk about a new way to build wireless networks, I remember the first time that I heard about Helium, and I bought a miner right away. They were very expensive back then, I feel like. That would have been 2021, maybe 2020, 2021, somewhere around there. Whenever your narrative first took off. And I remembered in my brain, I was like not native to crypto at the time. I think you guys, I might have bought a Helium miner before I ever even bought like any token ever in crypto besides like Bitcoin and Ethereum. So that was like, I was still in the like, I don't know, side hustle, passive income niche in my brain before I even knew about crypto, and I bought a Helium miner. And what my thought process back then was, hey, a new way to build networks. These guys are going to conquer Verizon. Like this is conquering Xfinity or AT&T, or whether that was like phones or my Wi-Fi, or is the plan that grand, or is it something different entirely? Like what is a new way to build wireless networks look like practically?
Yeah, and the thing that you described, which is you were new to crypto, it was before you had known anything about crypto. That is a majority of our community, and that's the way that we sort of thought about things, and the way that we continue to think about things is that you shouldn't really have to think about crypto when you're using the Helium network. And obviously we're still along that journey, but that is the end goal, right? Building something for human scale requires a human scale user experience, and needing to know about tokens, needing to know about how do I align my phone, or install a particular kind of SIM card, or do things specifically on my devices. Those are all pain points. It's all friction that prevents you from starting to use a network. And that our goal long term is always going to be to improve that user experience so that we can get to human scale. And every decision that we've made along the way has been sort of with that North Star in mind. And I think that Helium continues to be have the sort of ambition to be the world's largest decentralized wireless network, and we believe that it's important for us to have this kind of option that's available to us. And that's everything from, you might not have coverage in your area, or a particular kind of device might have coverage in an area. And, in the last, so you mentioned 2020, 2021, the Helium network launched in 2019. And the wireless network, the IoT wireless network, first started then. At the time, there wasn't a ubiquitous, affordable IoT network that was out there, at least. And so we chose a particular kind of IoT network, a particular kind of low power network called LoRaWAN. And at this point, over the last few years, our community has built what I would say the world's largest decentralized wireless network for IoT. And that's been the goal, and that continues to be the goal. And we're excited to see that. And what's been amazing about that is that now we're seeing those applications that can only really be possible when you have a network like this. And you mentioned your phone, and you mentioned Wi-Fi. That is the newer network on the Helium network. It's only really been around for about a year and a half in totality, but like in earnest, really in the last several months has it really been practical for users, right? When the mobile network started, you had to figure out how to install like a eSIM on your phone or use a physical SIM. These days, you can just sign up for a service, and yeah, we can jump into that too. I know I'm opening all the doors already.
I have a quick question, just with the idea of building a brand new way to build wireless networks. Maybe for a lot of people, and I'm one of those people included, I have no idea how regular networks are built. So just with that idea in mind of Helium being a new way, or maybe even better way to build networks, would you just simply put, how would you differentiate how old networks have been built for, I guess, forever, and how you guys are taking, what approach you guys are taking to make it better and new?
For sure. I think what we are not used to thinking about, and mostly because, we don't think about like, how do I get water to my house? Like, I know there's some pipes. I know I have to pay for those pipes. And if it doesn't work, like, there's some construction going on right out there, and they're like replacing our water line, like that matters, right? Like, I really want to know, if they're going to shut off water to the house, like what's going on. But typically I don't think about that problem. I assume that it's being provided, and that is, I think connectivity should be like that, and I think that should be, and we're very blessed. I'm based in the United States, and I'm in California, and we're very blessed to have good connectivity, at least where I live. But I had to work for it. There was no fiber option up where I live, and I have a microwave antenna on my roof, and so the other options were cable, which are pretty available, but there's some depending on your concerns around data privacy, like there are some downsides to using certain providers, and that was a thing that I didn't want to do for us, for me and my family, and so we went another route, but like that's not an option that's available to everybody, and I think that, and certainly as you get away from large cities, it becomes harder, and then forget the rest of the world. Access, I think ultimately access to broadband internet at the home, on your devices is a basic need, just as much as water, shelter, food, and power, right? And so I think why do these networks ultimately matter, and why this other option even should matter? I think one, it really comes down to choice, and it comes down to incentive alignment. And how are these networks being built? Typically, you have a large company, a large ISP, or a large telecom company that has to spend a tremendous amount of capital, and put fiber, towers, copper, and all the infrastructure that sort of goes with that, and all the people that are required to build that infrastructure. It's fairly centralized, and at least until now, like rightfully so, that was the only real way to build these kinds of networks at scale. But ultimately, these networks don't meet the needs of every single human. And if we sort of think about this as connectivity is a human sort of requirement, and potentially a right, I think that we need to meet every human where they are, and where they live. And it is expensive to put towers up in every single neighborhood, in every single city. It's and so if there isn't enough economic incentive for these sort of larger organizations, some of these neighborhoods don't get good connectivity. That's just what happens, and I don't necessarily blame them. We live in at least here, we live in a capitalist society, and I think that it sort of drives towards certain economic incentives, and so I think why do I think that Helium is interesting? I think ultimately it puts that right and that responsibility to the edges, and it pushes that to the individuals that live in these communities, and these individuals can have great you can pay for that backhaul to their home, and then distribute that connectivity to all of their neighbors, because they believe that their neighborhood needs that connectivity, and that is a thing that a single person can do, a sort of cooperative of folks can do in an area, and really sort of they have an incentive, right? They want to build that connectivity for their community, and so yes, again, incentives are aligned, and I think that's ultimately people often ask, like, why crypto? Like, it's really ultimately about incentive alignment, and sort of getting people over that sort of initial inertia of sort of bootstrapping these kinds of economic environments.
I dig that. You brought it in my mind. I don't know how familiar you are with like optimism, and I've heard Ben Jones say like probably 1 billion times, crypto solves like the public goods sector, things that the public just simply needs that other people aren't willing to solve because it costs too much for Verizon or Xfinity to go set up a wireless internet access network in Kisumu, Kenya, where there's just no financial incentive for them to do that as a $1 billion company. But the people that live there that desperately need access to the internet, there's incentive for them to set it up and to build it. And so like that makes a lot of sense to me. it reminds me again, the crew that connected us, our friends over at HiveMapper, that said, "Yep, you got to talk to Helium." There's, although it's completely different, still in the DePIN world. Again, it goes back to mapping those regions that nobody else ever would, because there just isn't a financial incentive large enough for those giant conglomerate corporations to do so. But the people that live there need it. And so if you can get those people to build it themselves, putting that responsibility on the individual, that makes a lot of sense. As far as so reasons why Helium exists, anyone anywhere can now get access to wireless networks. Like that is one of the overarching goals. That makes a lot of sense. As far as okay, well, I'm in the US. I do have access to internet. I pay for Xfinity. Kind of sucks. It's not great where I'm at, but it's all right. It's good. I have internet access. I have access to wireless networks. Where does Helium and connecting to the Helium network in that grand vision come into play for somebody like me who is in the US, is in a place where there's multiple options? Is it purely philosophy? Hey, yeah, I buy into this because I recognize what you guys are doing is better for the society we live in? Or is it more secure? Is it cheaper? Are they not stealing my data? Is it I don't know. If I'm looking at internet options, why would I choose to eventually go with the network that you guys are building?
It's a great question. I mean, I think the two answers. I'll give you the answer for you, and then the answer for other folks in the U.S. that are not as lucky as you and I are to have multiple options. So for us, for you and me, I think it really comes down to one. I think philosophy does matter, right? I think that ultimately being able to be in control of how these networks are being built, and who these networks are for, and the data that's being collected on these networks, and the ability for your personal data to be potentially used for other reasons, and really just having control over this kind of stuff. I think that's important to a lot of people. I think it also enables applications that we would have never really imagined could have happened. I think a really good example is, yes, we have really great backhaul for things like our Wi-Fi that we might have in our home. You have cable coming to the house or fiber coming to the house, and then you have wireless APs, Wi-Fi APs around the house, but all the devices in our houses still need to go through some kind of process to connect to the internet, right? I think about everything from the Nest Cam that is that might be sort of pointed out into my street, or something like a Nest Cam that might be pointed out in the street, to the sensor on my water supply line, and that lets me know how much water usage I have. The sensors that are on my I have a smart I have sort of some smart grid appliances in the house, and one of the things that I have is a power wall, and so knowing about those devices, how they're connected back to the internet, and being able to sort of manage and do those things. They're still ultimately using Wi-Fi when they're not really sending a lot of data, and they're also using that process of connecting these things to the Wi-Fi network. Now I'm sort of tied to the availability of that Wi-Fi network. I don't have a lot of redundancy that outside of my own power and my own cable that might be coming to the house. The really great thing about the Helium IoT network is it incentivizes you to provide coverage, or multiple folks to provide coverage in the same area and have a little bit of overlap. Such that if one house loses backhaul, internet that's coming to the house, or one tower, these are all tower operators effectively, one tower loses connectivity, the one down the street is still working, or the one even a mile away is still working, and they're both still providing coverage. And this is sort of I think about this thing from a redundancy perspective. When we lose power, my internet stays up. But when we lose internet, it falls back to another kind of internet provider. And that's something that we've sort of built for our house. And so I can still know if, the doorbell's ringing. I can still know if, someone is outside, on the patio. Those are all things that I can still know. Everything from, just simple sensing, whether somebody's there, all the way to live video if, that kind of data is available.
Cool. I have a quick question. Just while you've said IoT a couple times, Internet of Things. If someone doesn't know what that means, what is IoT compared to like traditional internet?
IoT, if you think about it, is it's how do our devices get connected back to the internet, right? Like ultimately, IoT is supposed to enable better like control and better applications from our devices. So that could be everything, sort of as innocuous as our fridge or dishwasher, and
weirdly my dishwasher connected to
cars.
the internet. Who knows why?
I hate it. I gotta be honest. I hate it. Like
I saw that Wi-Fi
I think there's
for the first time.
yeah,
and why?
yeah, and you're like, hell no, absolutely not. Like, I generally, personally have a pretty aggressive security posture with devices on our, excuse me, on our home network, and so like I'm not gonna the utility of what it can provide me the trade-off for me is not worth it being on our Wi-Fi
The
network
risk,
or even on like a sub network. And I think that's just where these are. But if that thing was using Helium, like using the LoRaWAN network, it's great. I don't even need to configure it because in where I live, there are at least 10 hotspots that are covering me. Probably way too many, to be honest. And so plug into power, it's immediately able to provide value to me. It is nice to know that to get a monthly report of how much water we used. It is good to know like, hey, your power usage has changed, or your EV has been drawing a lot more, or it's been running a lot more during the day, or something like that. That is actually very useful information for just for any family. And so these Internet of Things, like this meme, it really was a meme at the beginning, right? Like everything's going to be connected. All of our devices around us are going to be connected, and it's going to enable a lot of things for us as consumers. We really haven't seen that yet. I think there's a lot of reasons for it. One, I think there hasn't been a cheap, ubiquitous connectivity network for these things. Onboarding these things suck, at least at the consumer level. Like even like a camera, early on we used to use Nest cameras. These days we use something else, but like the Nest camera, you have to like scan this like tiny little QR code that's on the back of the camera. That's impossible to like really scan from a phone. And then you go through this whole like Wi-Fi process. And then if you change your Wi-Fi password, like here you go again, you got to go set that up again. And we change our Wi-Fi password probably every few months.
Yeah.
But like that's like that kind of stuff. The usability hasn't gotten there, and I think that I think ultimately you need these sort of ubiquitous networks to really work. And then the commercial side, Internet of Things has gotten way more use in general. I mean, I think one cool application on the Helium network that we found out about last year was a company that was making reusable mailers for e-commerce companies. So they would sell these boxes effectively, and they had embedded in them a Helium sensor. And now this e-commerce company can say, well, here's where this package is, here's where this clothing item is, or whatever they're sending. And they can do a better job than UPS or USPS can on providing tracking information for their customer. And also because it's reusable, they can throw the return, the customer can throw the return in there and send it back as well. And that's like also tracked all along the way. It's that kind of, those kinds of like more commercial use cases are only really possible when you have this like really wide network that's, easy to use and cheap.
And when you talk about sort of the idea of, when you were talking about how traditional networks are built, you were talking about the millions, if not billions of dollars that these companies have to sort of put to make this network sort of actually function. How is Helium able to tackle it differently? How are you guys actually building your network and making it decentralized and not having to spend millions, if not billions of dollars to build these networks?
I mean, I think simply like you're sort of pushing the responsibility, the cost, the responsibility, and ultimately the rewards to the edges, right? To the actual individual operators of these radios. Helium, like the sort of tongue-in-cheek way to describe Helium is that Helium is Airbnb for telco, right? Like you have some kind of resource here, like in Airbnb, it's space, it's a home, or maybe it's a room in a home. And for Helium, it's connectivity. And so with that connectivity, you can share that with anyone else, and ultimately you are incentivized to making sure that that connectivity stays up, right? And that's so that the cost of deploying telecommunications infrastructure is not just, and I don't want to even diminish this, but like it's not just the real estate cost, the radio tower cost, the backhaul cost to bring that internet to that tower, but it's also the cost of the humans that need to go check on it every few months, go need to maybe upgrade the antennas, or maybe make changes to, or change the alignment of these things. That human cost is also real, and I think that with a network like Helium, each individual is responsible for their radio, and they know based on the performance of their radio whether or not they're providing the best coverage where they are. And maybe they're providing too much, or they're overlapping too much with other coverage, so they might want to even consider moving it, or or changing where they are.
Cool. I have a question while we're on the point of like just these use cases. I do want to, you mentioned opening the box of Helium Mobile. I do want to ask some questions on that in a bit.
Sure.
But again, just thinking about like what this potentially unlocks. I remember, and maybe we can address this in a minute also, next question. But I remember I brought up that I've seen people critique Helium as like, oh, well, there's not any real use case there. You guys are kind of proving that completely false with Helium Mobile. Hey, like we build a network of infrastructure, and it empowers people to create really awesome things that otherwise wouldn't be able to exist. And I'm curious, like, what types of things do you see in a hopeful world that Helium is able to create, essentially by proxy of like, hey, we've established this huge network of people. It's one thing to talk about like, oh, I can connect my water sensor. This idea of like, oh, we can take on the mobile providers that are, I don't know, monopolizing the entire industry. That's a pretty freaking big deal. That's awesome. Like what other, I don't know. Yeah. Like, do you guys see yourselves, the average person, using you for Wi-Fi at some point? Like instead of Starlink or Xfinity or AT&T or whatever they use? Is there other things that like, hey, we would love to see this use case unlocked? This is, I don't know, the potential that is there. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, and I'll address it for both the IoT and the mobile side. Actually, I think there's like great examples on both. I think the wide use case and sort of the opportunities for these like very, very natural use cases on IoT, I think like is really like it's almost obvious when you see an example like the city of Lisbon reacting to a major storm, and being able to redirect their emergency services to the places where flooding is happening before it causes property damage. And that's only possible because the Helium network was built by the community there. Helium started off in the US, and then Europe came after, and there was a community of people in Lisbon and in Portugal in general, and Porto and other places as well, climbing roofs and putting antennas and doing that 2 years ago. And because that happened, 2 years later, the city was able to actually use that network that was deployed by these people to help keep property safe. That is like, can't have a better case study than that. And then, literally, I think it was a month later, we heard about another city, and I won't name the city because it's not very fair, but like a city here in the US that talked about how they built a LoRaWAN network from scratch, a private one, and spent more than $10 million on it, mostly because they didn't think, or they didn't know that their community, like their constituents, had already built a LoRaWAN network. And so those are the two counterpoints. Like, so I'm going to give you the win, and I'm going to tell you that's a loss. Like, it's a loss that constituent community wasn't able to inform their government. It was a loss that us, as folks that do talk about what's possible on the Helium network, didn't reach those city managers who were making these decisions. And so that these are the sort of two sides of it. And I think it's important that like as the community continues to maintain this infrastructure, like it is sort of us as a Helium Foundation to talk about these kind of local initiatives, but ultimately, like the reason why we want to align incentives to the actual deployers of coverage and the users of coverage is because then they can also evangelize that to their communities at large. And so that's on the IoT side. On the mobile side, I think Helium Mobile is the first proof of concept for how does cellular connectivity work with this kind of hybrid kind of network. And so this, why is it a hybrid network? There isn't enough Helium Wi-Fi and CBRS coverage yet in the United States for a practical cellular product, right? And that's why they need to fall back on T-Mobile. And for a majority of the geographic area of the US, and there's no question about this, and there's no one hiding it, you're using T-Mobile's network. But in the places where Helium as a protocol has incentivized you to deploy coverage, and then sort of we can talk about the technicals there if needed, but the network incentivizes you to deploy coverage in certain areas, and service providers and deployers can almost collaborate almost entirely on chain and say, well, you want coverage here, we will deploy coverage there, right? And that's something that's really possible with a network like Helium, with a network that uses blockchains for this kind of coordination, and in a very real time way. And I think that is what I want to see over the next 2 years, is this network really is built for the actual subscribers of these services. And I think Helium Mobile should only be the first of many. And I think it is hard for a large telecom company, or even a small, medium-sized telecom company, to take a bet on a hybrid network like this, because it's never been done before. So I think it's cool that Telefonica decided to also take that bet in Mexico, specifically starting with 2 pilots in Mexico City and Oaxaca. And I think we will see more of these over the next 2-3 years as well. It'll start off as pilots. It'll start off as can we expand our coverage? Can we provide better service for our subscribers with a different kind of network? And when they see that it's possible, and that it's it is cheaper, then why do these networks want to do this? Why is Helium Mobile so different than any other these things are called MVNOs, virtual network operators? Mm-hmm. Why are they so different? It's some of them have someone like Ryan Reynolds up there, as a spokesperson. No one in the Helium network is that attractive, I think, sadly. But I would say that it is significantly cheaper, right, to deploy these kinds of networks if you have actual Helium coverage in an area. And the thing about wireless networks, especially the broadband ones that that we are demanding as consumers, is that you can solve for the broadband use case with a very small geographic deployment. I mean, relatively speaking, a majority of high bandwidth traffic on cellular networks happens in a very small geographic area, and that's why you see companies really focusing on areas, and we're bringing that on chain, and we're bringing that and pushing that out to the edges, and that is the approach that we're taking. That's the bet that we're taking with this, with what is still an experiment, of course, because the total customer size here is small right now.
I want to go ahead and ask just a question to make sure that I understand how some of these networks work in the back end. If I'm understanding it correctly, Helium is the network for IoT, and Helium Mobile is a separate network specifically for mobile. So there are 2 different networks, and for someone who wanted to participate in each, they would each need their individual sort of device to participate on those networks. Is that correct?
That's right. So Helium IoT is one network. Helium Mobile is another network. Helium is a protocol that sort of encompasses all this.
Is the Helium Foundation behind both of those?
Yeah, great question. So Helium Foundation, we didn't actually go through what do I do every day besides a lot of things, I guess. So the Helium Foundation is responsible for the protocol at large, governance of the protocol. We also hold the IP of Helium as a brand, and then we sort of want to promote that as a brand. Over time, we want to do less of that protocol development. Over time, we want to do less of the governance. I think one of the things that we did very early on is we pushed governance out to the token holder base early. I don't want to go sort of sing the praises yet, but I think we're still pretty from a participation perspective for on-chain governance, we're actually pretty high, but the comparisons are not very great. It's all single percent in most DAOs and most on-chain governance. So I think that that is one of my goals, is to push governance, push the governance of the network even more into the hands of the community members, and even even though it's already been pushed quite a bit.
And I have a question here with the idea of sort of having a network for each specific use case. For someone who is probably looking at the future of Helium, do you feel like some of the other use cases that you guys would like to see will each need their individual network to actually function? Because I'm assuming you won't be able to do all the things on the IoT network or all the things on the mobile network itself.
Yeah, I think that, if you want to do things that are relating to like connecting devices that need to be low power and long range, and low bandwidth, like those are the sort of three things that they're sort of there's always a trade-off, right? Like if you want low power, then and you want long range, then you probably can't send a lot of data. But if you want to send a lot of data, like think of a high bandwidth like cellular network, and you want a lot of power, then you have very low range, and that's like typically what you see with most broadband. Like if you see like 5G ultra wideband on your phone ever, that's only in very small areas, and that's really the sort of struggle that telecom companies are finding. It's like, how do you serve all these different use cases? So for us, the way that I think about our two networks is really from a product perspective. What is the IoT network for? It's for connecting devices over this low power, long range network, to in sort of a ubiquitous way. Like you can go anywhere and you can use this network. And what is the mobile network for? And what is the mobile token for, and all that? We can go into tokenomics if you'd like, but like what is that for? It's really for connecting cellular devices, right? These are eSIM authenticated or Wi-Fi cert authenticated phones or iPads, and those are the kinds of devices that would connect to those. And so if you came and said like, oh, I want to connect, and I'll use a very simple example here, like I want, and then something that I actually would love to see, I want to get Helium hotspot owners their network coverage, like their internet. You think of that as backhaul, right? Like I think that is an opportunity for a new subnetwork to exist, because that's not either of these other cases, right? Like the product use case is very different. It's about providing maybe even unmetered backhaul to a particular site, and that could be over cable, it could be over copper, it could be over fixed wireless, and it could be over satellite. Like all those things are potential options of how that could be. And
so there's like a world where I could be running my Helium miner and I could completely stop paying for Xfinity's Wi-Fi, because that gets solved through the Helium network.
Yeah, so like that basically requires you to be in two networks, right? Like you'd be, you're running a Helium hotspot to provide coverage, and you're getting coverage over another kind of Helium hotspot, another kind of network, which hasn't, like, to be clear, it doesn't exist yet. Yeah, but could, and I'd love to see someone in the community come up with that.
And the reason why I bring that up, sort of the idea of the different networks for each use case, is looking maybe a couple years down the road, 5-10 years down the road, as Helium's long-term roadmap. How do you guys, because one of the things that we've seen, and you brought up governance, is that maybe there's a lot of participation in that first vote because everybody's excited, oh my God, I can participate in a governance vote. But then by the second one, maybe like half people actually participate in that vote. And then by the 10th vote, maybe no one's around. It's only the people that are really dedicated to the network. How do you, as you continue to build out use cases and the community wants to bring in new use cases to the networks and maybe bring in a whole new network, how do you get the people who participated in the Helium network and then Helium Mobile to continue participating in these other use cases if it requires them to have a brand new device or set up something new? How do you get people to continue doing that along the way with you guys?
I think that's a great question, and there's sort of two kinds of questions. I think there's two questions inside of that. One is, how do you get people to continue to stay engaged? And the other one is, how do you get people to re-engage with new potential ways to interact with the network? And so to stay engaged, obviously, there's the sort of base economic alignment and incentive model of Helium-like networks. And so we have two of them, and there are other like unaffiliated networks that are very similar. This term called DePIN exists out there. And like these, keeping folks aware of what they need to do to continue to be providing, for doing work for this network, like providing coverage on this network. That that's a hard question, I think, and the way that we answer that question is, the protocol should adjust to the needs of the network over time, right? And that's and I think that you can't be like perfectly you can't be perfectly ossified for the way that emissions happen for the network. And there might be some things that are unchangeable, right? Like you might have a fixed supply and you don't want to change that. But the way that coverage is rewarded, and we see this now in the IoT network, and there was literally a change that happened just a few weeks ago that was, it came from the community, and it was an update to the way that hotspots were scored. And I'll sort of generalize it a little bit. It's the way that hotspots are scored so that they would be rewarded for proof of coverage. That changed, and that actually created some amount, like after the vote happened and after the implementation happened, it created chatter, and chatter is still ongoing, and there's no question that some folks are negatively affected by their earnings, with their earnings. And I think what's important there is like keeping folks educated, informed, and then having them continue to participate in governance. Like if they feel so strongly that that change shouldn't be made because they want to think of this entirely, for their own deployment. And look, like I'm not going to say that they have no right to do that. They absolutely do, have the right to sort of be selfish for their own deployment. And that's not selfish in a bad way. That's just how these sort of systems are supposed to work. And I think that but keeping them informed and engaged is the job of this, of us as the foundation, and the comms that happen in the community. But ultimately, they do need to participate. And if the network kind of changes the way they want to reward particular kinds of deployments, that should be the network's choice. That is also part of the thing that you agreed to coming in. You didn't agree to have an infinite money printer. Like that wasn't that wasn't how this thing works. You're providing something of value, and if that doesn't work for you anymore, it's understandable. I think Matthew, you mentioned like something around like the sort of expectations of the community has changed. Yep. There's we've as a network, because we've been around so long and we continue to be pretty successful, I think obviously we'll have critics, and that's how these things are supposed to happen. I think that I'll just come out and say it. We've had almost, like, if you look on chain, almost 1 million hotspots across the network. The two networks have been deployed on chain, like have been paid for and put on chain. But if you look at the actual number of active hotspots, it's in the hundreds of thousands, and that's a gap, and like that's an easy, like very mimetic thing to be like, oh look, no one's using Helium, or no one's on Helium anymore. But the reality is, hotspots that were deployed that didn't provide coverage that aligned with the network's goals, they were turned off. And that's right. Or maybe they're 5 years old and the hardware is not working anymore. We can't. This is consumer hardware ultimately, and they do have life cycles as well. So it could be a variety of reasons. It could be economic. It could be technical. It could be also lack of interest. It could be people moving. It could be any of these things. And so I think these kinds of networks are hardy when they are flexible to the changes of demand on the network. And I think we already saw this on the IoT network. I think we will see this again on the mobile network. And there's no way to turn up the rewards. Like that's not how these kinds of networks work. There is a way to reward coverage that is needed, and that meets demand.
I have a question just while we're on, just tacking onto the piece that you just addressed. That critique or criticism that I referenced, I think is worth tackling. Yeah, just because from my perspective, a piece of that criticism is entirely incorrect. And so I don't even think we need to get all into that. Like, I'll say this to anyone listening. I think if your response to someone who has existed as a brand, a project, a network, a blockchain, whatever, for years in crypto is, oh, look, the price doesn't look as awesome as it did before, you're probably not critiquing the right things, because you're just looking at prices. And if you're really not taking into account like bull markets versus bear markets, come on, man. Like it feels like a ridiculous argument. So I will say I'm not really interested in getting into like hey, what happened with prices? the markets happened, look at everyone's charts. What I am interested in asking, you addressed already that like part of that criticism was, hey, there was a lot more hotspots active at one point. Is Helium dying because the hotspots are inactive? The other piece that I saw that someone critiqued, that was actually brought up to me last week, and he asked me a question about it, was there was a specific, I don't remember the stats that this guy referenced, but it was essentially, hey, look, Helium pays tokens to people who are running these hotspots to power the network. Well, the majority of people using the network are just companies that are running these miners. So it's like they're running the miner to get paid to run the miner, and then they're the ones actually accessing the network. Is anyone using the network besides miners? Is anyone using the network besides miners? Like, who's using the network that isn't mining, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, and I think the two examples I mentioned earlier, like that package tracking use case, the cities is another use case. I think there's been some really interesting things around water leak detection, and sort of being more proactive around finding leaks when they happen, air quality monitoring. Like I think actually you had Ariel, and that's how we got connected. You mentioned that earlier. HiveMapper uses the Helium network. And they specifically use the Helium network to help with verification of the data that they are collecting, from the dash cams. Similarly, Demo uses the Helium network, and Demo's another one of these.
Before this podcast existed, I interviewed Demo in a Twitter Spaces a long time ago, so we know them too.
Yeah. They last year released a very, very specific product that was significantly cheaper. And the original AutoPie, I forget if it was $4.99 or $3.99 or something.
That was when we would have interviewed them. Would have been probably 2022, early 2022.
So their original device was way more expensive because it used other kinds of backhaul, like other kinds of internet. And their newest device, they're able to sell it at under $100, which is way more accessible to the rest of us. And it solely uses the Helium LoRaWAN network for backhaul, which I think is like that just shows two things. One, that using a network like Helium can sort of reduce your base cost of your hardware, but it also shows how long it takes for hardware to be developed. This kind of stuff, there's the old saying, hardware is hard. And I've certainly heard lots of advice of never try to build a hardware company. This is now the second thing that I've worked on in my life that requires a lot of hardware. So I apparently don't listen very well. But yeah, like I think, these hardware cycles take time. And we're starting to see, other use cases. I think another one that's kind of interesting, also a Web3 project is WeatherXM. And they use the Helium network, or they have a SKU that is entirely, Helium driven. And what's cool about that device, and I have one of those on my roof, it has solar for power, a little battery to feed, to store some energy, especially at night and when there's not a lot of sun. And it uses Helium LoRaWAN for sending data back about local weather, and that means it's an entirely standalone device, and that means that you don't need to think about like, oh man, how do I get Ethernet on my roof? Because that's where you want this device. You don't want to put this on your window or on your deck. You want to put this thing on your roof. You want to get accurate wind, water, or rainfall, and and temperature information. And these are devices that should be placed in places that are pretty hard to reach, really.
Yeah.
For them to provide the best value.
So yeah, definitively, people are using the Helium network outside of miners. Do you feel like, I don't know the stats, and that critique that was brought up to me, and again, this was a person, it was my dad. I'll just say that. I told my dad, he's a big crypto maxi. I told my dad, dude, I'm stoked. I'm interviewing, we're getting Helium on the podcast. And he was excited. And he was like, hey, you should ask them about that criticism that I saw. And I think the big piece of that was just, more people are using the majority. I don't know the stats he used. I felt like it was like 50% or something, but like the majority of people that are using the network are people that are being rewarded from the network. If that's true, like if those stats are still, say 60% of people using the Helium network are mining companies or anyone else that is like mining or or operating hotspots. Is that a problem at all in your mind? Like, does that even matter? They're running the network. Does it matter if a higher percentage are people running the network than people using the network? If that makes sense.
I think it does matter if they are they're not actually using the network, if they're trying to game something.
Okay.
But otherwise, if they're actually providing a product to customers, right? Like, I'll give you a perfect example. Helium Mobile uses anywhere between like $2,000 to $3,000 worth of sends about $2,000 to $3,000 worth of traffic over the Helium network every day. Or they have been over the last couple of days. I haven't looked at it in a couple of days. There's a great dashboard on Dune. If you just look up Helium data credits, it might be the first Google results. And you can see, like, this dashboard. It's something that we created and we're curating as well, but it's entirely based on on-chain data. So, we can't even like mess with it or whatever. Right. And yeah, like Helium Mobile uses, anywhere between $2,000 and $3,000 of data a day. And remember, that's 50 cents a gigabyte. Right. And so that they are moving, terabytes of data on the network.
Yeah.
Now, yes, they are highly incentivized to do so because their business model depends on this. Right. And so is there anything wrong with that? I don't think so. I think that's sort of showing you the proof of why these kinds of networks need to exist, because it creates the opportunity for these new business models.
With Helium having been around since 2019, you guys are, I don't know if you guys have already hit the 5-year mark, but this year would be the 5 years. With Helium Mobile being around for, I believe you said about a year and a half now. Looking at the next couple of years, and you mentioned this when you were talking about sort of why some of these devices go down, why some of the hotspots are no longer on, talking about the life cycle of these consumer products. With these consumer products, yes, you don't have the life cycle as like $1 million tower outside of your house that's going to last for 20, 30 years. Maybe you get a 5-6 years out of it. How do you, is the sort of bringing the cost down of this hardware as low as possible while maintaining the sort of the efficiency of the higher end models one of you guys' main goals looking the next couple of years? Because what I'm thinking is, hey, if we're seeing that maybe the devices that were bought in 2019, 2020 are starting to go down because they're no longer working the way they're used to, they don't meet the same standards that we have for the network today, how can you incentivize those people that had that model to upgrade to a newer model? And one of the ways that I'm thinking is, if you guys can really get down the price of that hardware low enough, because at the end of the day, one of the main use cases that we mentioned earlier in this episode is, hey, places in the country or places around the world that don't have the coverage. Maybe those people don't also have 700 or 800 or however expensive these devices can get to actually participate in that work. Is that one of you guys' main goals looking down the road for the next couple of years, bringing down the prices of that hardware to be able to incentivize people to continuously upgrade to these new devices?
It definitely is. And on the IoT side, it's already happened. So when we launched the network, you could only buy one kind of hotspot. It was made by the founding company, Nova Labs, and it was the original hotspot. And that was I think if I remember correctly, the retail price was $450. And it did go like I think there was a period of time where, because of the supply chain being what it was, because of COVID, like a variety of reasons, it's all in the past now, but like there was a time where you would buy these, like you would see these devices on eBay selling at a ridiculous premium. And we see this now with other projects, and some of us kind of just like sigh very deeply about it. Like when I see a demo, like a Hive Mapper dash cam or a Solana mobile phone on eBay at like
For
3,
thousands.
4, 5 times, like, yikes, right? Like that's tough, right? Like, and I know people who, like, very personally, I know people who have bought these devices and off of secondary markets. So I think that that sort of happens, unfortunately, but over time that price does sort of resolve, and also. The reason why they were more expensive at the start of the network is because they used to run a full blockchain. They were running a full blockchain client, on our old layer 1 that we launched in 2019 along with this network. We've since not needed to run a full client node on these devices. So they can be significantly cheaper and smaller and more power efficient. Even more power efficient. It was already like pretty like cheap. It was like a 5 watt power draw, and it can be even better than that now. And so you're starting to see hotspots, at the $100 price point. I think the one thing that hasn't changed, this is my personal opinion, the community hasn't come up with this proposal yet, but I don't think onboarding a hotspot on the network should cost $50. I think it should be like 10. And at some point, I'll probably get sort of riled up about it enough to write the HIP myself. But I really hope someone in the community is probably listening and going like, okay, that was my cue. I'm ready to write this HIP. I think that it is important to, again, like change adjust over time. Protocol should be very flexible over time to the realities of the community and the realities of the network. And the realities of what real demand is on the network too. And I think that this is one of those things that should change, and that's why on-chain governance exists.
Yeah, and I think I think both sides of the table also have responsibilities. The network and sort of the Helium Foundation has the responsibility to try to put these hardwares to the place where everybody can participate. But on the other side, I think one of the big misconceptions of a lot of people is, especially when they first heard about Helium, they're like, oh, passive income. I can just plug this in and I just become rich overnight. And it's like, no, you're taking up a responsibility, being part of a network. You have certain expectations to participate in these things like governance, to be able to keep up to date with things like, hey, I need to upgrade my software, or I need to update certain things to make sure that I'm actually being helpful and participating and being of use to this network. So I don't think it's definitely just all on you guys. I think it's everyone has to work together to actually make this thing a reality. And I think hearing that hey, these devices can be $50, $10 somewhere down the road, I think is huge, because when you do think about millions of people participating, maybe millions of people don't have that 450 or that 300 or whatever that may be to participate and be part of this. But if you're able to get that down to a level where, anyone can do it, and even if they don't really know, but this could be their introduction to the whole wider crypto scene and DePIN, like that's huge. That's a huge win all across the board.
Yeah, and I'll do one more plug there, which is, so if you look at the Helium map, and you can see it, explorer.helium.com, there are some parts of the world that are completely uncovered by the IoT network, and certainly by the mobile network because it's so new, but by the IoT network, which is pretty large today. I think one plug, something that I'm pretty excited about is we're making a change to the network to support Africa on a single frequency plan. This is something that's never happened before for LoRaWAN, which is this protocol in general. We are taking the sort of early step here and saying, this is what the frequency plan should be for Africa. We've worked with the African Telecom Union. This is think like FCC, but across countries. And this is the something that we can do. Like we spend the time on the government relations side, and that's we advocate on behalf of the community, in these kinds of venues, and that's something that we can do. So we can make sort of technical changes, but also kind of policy changes, sort of enable these kinds of policy actions. That's absolutely in our wheelhouse, and we're ready to work with local partners to do stuff like that. But what I hope happens, and it's going to be a little rocky, and I'll admit this is something that is unfortunately necessary in these kinds of networks, is that there will be a demand for even cheaper gateways. This is the thing that you just said, right? Like, where's the $10 gateway? Because even a $50 gateway might not make sense in some communities.
Right.
And it might turn into, okay, how do we repurpose gateways that are not being very useful in Europe, which are, by the way, the same exact frequency plan, and how do we move them to Africa? How do we go, what is the reseller process here? What is the refab process here? Like, these exist already for phones. You have these companies that you can sell your phone to. They refurbish it and they redeploy it somewhere else. I want to sort of enable these kinds of businesses to exist. This is not something that we're a 15-person team at the foundation. It's not something we could take on ourselves. But consider this like another call to action. And I keep doing this. I'm using your podcast for this. Sorry, another call to action. Build that kind of refurbishment business that enables more IoT connectivity in Africa by, repositioning hardware that is too dense anyway in Europe, probably.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a cool idea. I think one of the fun things just talking to you is seeing all of the little ways that businesses can be built out of what you guys have created with the IoT network and with the mobile network. It's just this idea of like, if you, I don't know who we were talking to that you said something like that. Similarly, Caesar, like, I think you find someone really cool in Web3 when they've created something that doesn't just solve like the singular issue that they wanted to solve, but they actually solve that one thing and then open up solutions for like 50 other problems that other people can say, oh, I can literally take what you've built and apply it to these other problems and create solutions that we otherwise just had no clue how to fix. And I think that's part of the beauty of, I don't know, Web3 and how communal this whole environment is. It's rad. I have one more question about misconceptions. Caesar brought up that misconception. It got me thinking about this when he said one of the misconceptions was, and this was probably one of my misconceptions before I really got involved in crypto, was money printer, baby. I just plug this thing in my wall and I just get free money. This is awesome. I think that type of person could view anything that is generating rewards as like a Ponzi scheme or Ponzi-nomics, just unsustainable. I think back to, I won't name drop because I don't want to be that guy, but I think back to some of the node projects. I don't know if you were involved in that craze in 2021 when they were like calling themselves nodes and you would just buy these nodes that no node existed. They were just money printers in the DeFi experiment. And that was like truly a Ponzi. That all it was buy this node, we'll print you some tokens every day, go get more people to buy in. Where exactly are the rewards for hotspot providers coming from, and how is that sustainable and not a Ponzi like some of those fake node movements?
Yeah, I guess so. These weren't like I guess these weren't like Bitcoin nodes. Like, or
no,
Ethereum
did you never
nodes.
like? Did you ever hear a strong block? I said I wouldn't name drop, but
yeah, sorry, no,
I
lost
a lot of money on strong.
Understood.
But
That's frustrating.
no, that was like a
that
whole.
sucks.
I don't know how. I was when I got into crypto. I mentioned I bought one of your guys' miners, but really, like when I dove in, it was like I went straight into the deep end of like reckless degen DeFi of like, let's just try out money experiments and see what works. And it was honestly a lot of fun. And I made a lot of great wins, but there was a lot of them that were just, if it wasn't a scam, it was scam adjacent because they were just, it was printing money. They were trying, and some of them were actually cool and they failed, but it was all this idea of like, hey, can we like mess with the way that money itself works and like new monetary systems? That's part of what DeFi is. And so,
I mean, experiments are necessary. They're sort of like, this is the hardest part of all these kinds of new kinds of
trying
networks.
Something brand new.
We are trying a lot of new things. And, we established our tokenomics back in 2018, 2019. And, the way that we established those tokenomics is that it started off with a majority of the earnings go towards hotspots for the potential of providing coverage in the future. And, there was a carve out for actual data usage. But early on in these kinds of networks, there isn't a lot of data usage. Like everything from as I mentioned before, hardware cycles could be long, adoption curves sometimes are slow, and then they suddenly go. These are all things that happen with these kinds of networks and these kinds of marketplaces in general. I think that where does the token emissions come from? It comes from the protocol. Like, that's number one. And why does the protocol do it? Is because it wants to incentivize the bootstrapping of this kind of marketplace and this kind of network. And that needs, but it still needs to be for some real amount of work, right? And this is sort of maybe the differentiator than what you're describing as like node projects. I think of like I've only really ever worked on two crypto things, Bitcoin and Helium. And so some of my biases come from Bitcoin. And also some of my criticisms come from Bitcoin as well, right? Like, my belief that protocol should be very dynamic comes from a frustration that, Bitcoin isn't as dynamic. And there's a lot of good reasons for it. So I don't want to like, I'm not like, I happy to continue to be a supporter of Bitcoin, continue to be a supporter of a lot of sort of very base layer projects that I think are really important. And, happy to be building on Helium, because ultimately I think all of these kinds of networks are providing some real world value. And that is like ultimately like that's where the tokens come from. It's from doing some work.
Yeah.
If you're not doing work, I don't know then. I don't know where those are coming from. So I do have the hairs in the back of my neck do sort of like get up when I hear about like, here's a money printing node. And I never want to be that for Helium either, right? I think it does take work to operate a hotspot. I think it does take work to participate in governance, and I think you should be rewarded for that work. But I don't think you should be rewarded for not doing that work.
Yeah, well said. And I would say, like, from my perspective, if you're coming from the DeFi space and you saw money printer years ago, and that's where you connected or correlated Helium, it's as simple as that. Those Ponzi-nomic experiments were simply buy this thing and then make money perpetually. Do nothing else. You literally just bought it. And it wasn't even a thing. You just bought something imaginary and you got money in return. That's called a Ponzi. Buying a literal piece of hardware and then contributing to a network is not a Ponzi. Yeah, you're essentially providing work in exchange for value. Simple as that. Yeah, makes sense. Caesar, go ahead.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, so you launched in 2019, you experienced the bull run of 2020, 2021, and then experienced the crash of 2022 and what we witnessed in 2023. What lessons have come out for Helium in this last bear market, and what are you looking forward to in this year where things are starting to look up a little bit? We're seeing the Bitcoin ETF being passed. We're seeing people getting excited. We're seeing Bitcoin hit $50,000 again. Things are starting to look up. What lessons have you learned from this bear market that we just witnessed, and what are you looking forward to in this year?
I mean, I think that taking the long view has always been my sort of idea with everything, with all technology. And, that is maybe the most important lesson, right? Like the bull, bear, whatever, sideways market, whatever it is, although important, like I don't want to discount the value and sort of the mimetic value of price. It does exist. And it does create activity, and it creates attention. So, no knock on that. But like, I think it is important to think about building in the long term, right? And, when you think about telecom, these kinds of systems have been built over, in some cases, like some of these copper wires have been around for like 100 years. Unfortunately, have been around for 100 years, and maybe we can do a little better on that iteration, right? I don't think our hardware that is, providing connectivity on our phones should be, 20, 30 years old. I think that it needs to be more reactive to the demands of us, us as consumers, and it should be reactive to where we are as consumers as well. And I think we saw this a lot during COVID and post-COVID. People move, right? People move around, and they are very dynamic. And looking at a population model 10 years ago in order to develop like a map of where you want to put your telecom infrastructure is absolutely wrong. And I hope that, ISPs, like the traditional ISPs, are at least coming closer to where we are on wanting much more dynamic networks, and hopefully using networks like Helium to supplement their deployments as well.
Cool. I dig that. Well, I just have one final question for you for this episode is if people are just enticed by, maybe they did know Helium and they hadn't paid attention for a hot minute and now they're reawakened by what you guys are doing. Or this is somehow the first time that they've heard of Helium Network and what you guys are building. Where is the best place for them to not just like follow along, but to get involved with your community, with what you guys are building, with the network, If they want to run nodes, whatever that looks like? Like, how should they take action steps after this episode?
Number one, helium.com is the sort of homepage for the protocol and the networks as a whole. Helium has a Twitter account that we manage at the foundation, and we talk about all the things that are being built on the network and the things that you can do on the network. We also talk about like places like this. We'll probably repost this podcast there so that other folks in the community can come access this content. I think it really depends. The one thing that I wish we have more of is more short form video content. This is great. Like this lets me talk about stuff at length, but there's value in having short form content and sort of very, very quick primers. We're starting to publish some of these things at the foundation, but hope to see more in the community as well around this. And then our Discord is if you want the fire hose, that's the way to get the fire hose. And it's discord.gg/helium. We can post a link probably on the podcast.
Yeah, it'll all be down here.
Awesome. And so like that's a great resource if you just want the absolute fire hose. I think it's a lot and I'm deep in it. And I think that there's but what's awesome is that over the years we've developed this community of a lot of very helpful people, a lot of really great moderators. Two of the moderators actually work for the foundation, but we have a bevy of very, very, very dedicated Helium like educators, and I'd really consider them as educators for the protocol. They're aligned with the protocol because they either deploy coverage or they use the coverage for their businesses or something like that. That's why they're there, and that's why they know so much, because they're actual users of the network.
Beautiful. Awesome. Yeah, if you're listening, go show some love. And if you've appreciated this episode, find Helium at all of the spots that we put down here, and connect with these guys. I think when we're asking the question at 100x, and we're not just talking, I think sometimes people see 100x and they think, oh, are you just looking at prices? No, man, we're looking at like, what is going to—
That was my reaction. I got to be honest. That was my reaction. That was the first question I asked you. It's like, hey, like, I appreciate this intro, but like, this is not, I don't want to talk about prices. And
no, we have
no, we're not going to.
Out of 5 that we talk about prices. So we do have one show that we talk about prices, and that's just looking at like really new upcoming projects. But everything else, it's like, who is it that is building something awesome that will 100x the value of crypto in the real world? Who is it that's going to take things that already exist and say, nope, that can be done 100 times better? And in my mind, we're looking for those guys that are building, and girls, the 10% of people that listen to us that are not dudes. Shout out to you guys. And we're looking for those, right? Who is it that is making real life examples of like, hey, this is what crypto can do? I really liked that example of, was that Portugal, Lisbon, that you guys were able to say, hey, we just solved like real world flooding, people losing their homes. We were able to address and solve faster than the government there was able to. That's phenomenal. That proves that crypto has a place in society. And so for me, yeah, man, that's what these conversations are about, is like, I did not come into crypto as a developer, did not come into crypto as an engineer, did not come into crypto as someone who understood the language. I was just wondering, is there any usefulness in this? Is this all a scam? Is this all craziness? Is there something tangible here? And to me, these are the kind of conversations that prove, yeah, man, like we're actually contributing to society in a way that society needs, and we can evolve the way that things are done. And so shout out to Helium. You guys are taking wireless networks that have existed for, I was going to say a long time. I don't really know how long, 50 years. And saying, hey, we can do that better. We can take what has been monopolized and distribute it among people and essentially collect the power of millions of human beings and make this better. So dig it. I love it. Thank you for sitting down with us. This has been a blast. Go show Helium some love.